Welcome to my talk, Fed Up, Nobody Cares About Your UI, Misconceptions in UI and UX. Fed Up is our front-end, Front-end developers understanding pixels. It's a guild that we have within Accusoft, so it's just a group of people from across the company that come together to talk about UI and UX every month. So this presentation was originally created for that. So this presentation is going to be talking to people who don't typically do UI and UX. It's going to be from that level. I was targeting developers for this presentation. People who are developing and as you know, nowadays, more people who are doing back-end development are also being expected to do front-end development. So there's a lot of little gotchas and stuff, and all these misconceptions that are in this presentation are things that I've dealt with on a personal basis throughout my career. So I'm going to kind of go through. So let me introduce myself. I'm Michael Irigoyen. I've been doing UI UX design for about 15 years. During that time, I've also worked with PHP extensively, JavaScript, ECMA script. Yeah, I got it on, thanks. And most recently, Node.js, since I started with Accusoft a little over a year ago. But I'd like to start with like a personal mantra that it's not mine specifically. Martin LeBlanc said this, but a user interface is like a joke. If you have to explain it, it is not that good. That's how I like to think about everything. If I have to overly explain something to somebody, it's not a good design and we need to rethink it. So let's jump into some misconceptions here. And the title of the presentation is Nobody Cares About Your UI. So misconception 1, people care about your UI. Well, that's what a lot of people think, but what people really care about is themselves. So think about it. Your average user is not, they're not interested in your UI. They're interested in what they're trying to accomplish. They're coming to your product or your website to do something. So keeping those things in mind, your design should solve their problems. It should be intuitive, and it should perform well. You always want to incorporate the simplest solution. You don't want your users to think. They're there for themselves, and they're there to do something, and if they have to think about how to use your product, they might go find another product. If an average user, your average Joe user has an opinion about your UI, you probably want to rethink it. You know, you ask a developer, you ask a design friend, what do you think of my product? They're probably going to pick out some things about their UI that they think are nice and flashy and whatever. But if your average user has an opinion about it, there may be something wrong. Not all the time, but it is a good thing to think about. Jean-Louis Gassi here, HP, Apple, Nokia. He says, simple is hard, easy is harder, invisible is hardest. And you don't want to think about it this way, but your UI needs to be invisible. While people are using it, it just needs to be a natural extension of them. So we're going to jump into the second misconception, and that is UI and UX are the same thing. Now, they're not the same thing by any means, but they do share a lot of similarities, and they are very closely connected. So let's talk about user experience design. It's more of the research and the process of enhancing the customer experience. Problem solving is a good word that comes to mind when you talk about user experience. And during that time, you want to figure out how you're going to improve usability, how you're going to create ease of access for the users that are visiting your site or product, and to make sure that they're satisfied. So some of the responsibilities is competitor analysis, usability studies, wireframing, minimal code, prototyping. So they're going to come up with, like in our company, our UX guy will come up with black and white wireframes. He often points out the fact that there's no color and there's no graphics on them because those aren't the points of discussion when it comes to user interface. We're talking about how the user interfaces and interacts with your product. So those are the things that a user experience designer is going to focus on. Now, user interface design, you're going to see more developers doing, and it's the process of developing that interface. So in that case, you're going to be doing aesthetics and all the fancy things, not using blink tags. Use of attractive graphics, colors, fonts, creating that responsive experience for the users. And responsive here means, of course, two different things nowadays. Responsive as in it can be used on any device. You look at a desktop, you look at a phone, you get similar designs. But also that it's snappy and it gets what you need done quickly. So responsibilities, technology analysis, you got to look at your target audience. These two kind of go hand in hand. If you're developing a site that may be for retirement, you're probably going to have an older crowd So you have to think about that demographic. You may have people with older computer or people who don't stick up with technology, so maybe you need to support IE8. But if you're doing something kind of for maybe like a college or something that's like late breaking, you may not need to spend those development cycles doing those types of things. So you need to know what you're targeting because it could save you time. User interface, people are sometimes branding, graphic development. A lot of times that may come from a marketing or a graphic design department. A lot of these, again, intersect. So, but you're always given some source graphics and you need to do something with them. So you may do some manipulation there. And then, of course, the front-end code development. So writing the JavaScript, writing the HTML, writing the CSS, and the tools that go along with those things. Here is a user experience wheel. This was developed by Magnus Ravang. He put it together for his own personal use, and it's actually caught quite a lot of traction. There's a lot of things up there, and some of them may not be completely legible to you, but when we're talking about user interface design, we're talking more about typographic elements and graphic elements and media use and color scheme and contrast, those types of things. But you could see how much more that actually goes into it. There's a whole research and credibility and usefulness. There are a lot of pieces of the user experience that is actually research and problem solving. It's not just making things look pretty. And then user interface is taking that research and building on top of it. So let's move on to the next misconception. Design is about making a website look good and sparkly. So out of these two, these are two different websites I just pulled off the internet. One is Reddit, which I think many people might be familiar with. This one over here is a jewelry website. Which has the better design? Well, one could argue that this one looks very pretty, it's very artistic. I wish I had a more interactive version. When you mouse over those flowers, they kind of fade out and they have words like passion and desire. And if I click passion, I get men's jewelry. So now Reddit has a good design. It's not aesthetically pleasing. There could be some nicer things on it, but it's very well organized, and you can tell what you want to do and what you're planning on doing when you get there. You don't have to play the click and back game, which I'll talk about more later. So, design is about making a website functional, first and foremost. So, again, it's about form and function, and this principle actually goes way back. It's older than the web. It was first conceived from modernist architecture design, and that simply stated that the shape of the building should primarily be based upon its intended function. So if you're going to be, given the task to create a ballroom, and you put all these elaborate sculptures and these fancy windows, and it can hold 5 people, you failed in your job as designing. That can be translated directly to the web. So the goal of design is to efficiently solve your problems. And compared to typical art, it's good design also you need to include the visual appeal, because something that looks pretty, that's the human experience. You're going to be drawn to that. So going off of Steve Jobs, which many people here know, design is not just what something looks like, and it's how it works. And I think Apple, over the years, especially under his leadership, has proven that to be the case. They have really evolved the design of hardware and operating systems and the interfaces that you deal with them. So I think he knows what he's talking about. But let's move on to then misconception that design has to be original. So it's not the case. Design does not have to be original. It needs to be evolutionary. You need to take something that someone else has done and expand on that. So don't reinvent the wheel. Don't spin your wheels reinventing the wheel. And don't make your users think. When your user comes to your site and it is a familiar experience because it's been used in other places, they can start interacting with it immediately. They're not going to have to learn your product to figure out how to do what they want to do. Of course, you don't want to plagiarize. You're not going to go copy Google's homepage and put it on your product and slap a new logo on it and expect to get away with it. So you want to expand on those things, and exactly that, expand on those ideas and research, because Google's done the research, Amazon's done the research, they've done extensive research, and now you have a good starting point where you don't have to have that upfront cost or that upfront time commitment. Utilize frameworks such as Bootstrap, Foundation, there's plenty others out there. These frameworks pretty much have some of that research baked into them already, so you can just get off the ground running. Not only is it an ease of development, but you don't have to worry about accessibility some of the times, at least the base stuff, or just basic usability. And then innovate where necessary. When something that you want to use just doesn't do what you needed to do, use that as your baseline and innovate. Make it what you need. So, of course, we got a quote here: immature poets imitate, mature poets steal. Bad poets deface what they take, and good poets make it into something better, or at least different. Obviously, I'm a bad poet because I have defaced this completely. Who actually said that is T.S. Eliot. And actually, he's a student of his own words because someone said that before him too, Pablo Picasso. He said, good artists copy, great artists steal. So this has been through the ages, and there's no reason to stop it now. So this leads into the next piece. If it works for blank, it's going to work for you. A lot of people, and I've heard this a lot, well, this is how Google does it, so we're going to do it that way too. Not always the best scenario. So if it works for somebody else, you need to figure out why it works for them, and then try to manipulate it and mold it into something that works for what you're trying to do. So it's an excuse. It's a lazy design practice. If you just say, well, Google does it, we're going to do it that way, you're not doing the research to figure out what you need for your product. It's not always going to be a one-to-one translation. Does Google have the same goals as you? Does Amazon have the same goals as you? Probably not. They're probably similar, but they're probably not the same. So you want to identify the problem that you are trying to solve, and don't copy functionality blindly. I mean, these all pretty much are the same things, because you don't know the reasoning behind the design. You weren't in the meetings that Amazon had behind closed doors and said, this is what we need to do, this is the problem that we're trying to solve, and the evolution to get to their answer to solve the problem. If you just copy it blindly, you're not responding to your users' needs. Your users are not Amazon users, or maybe they are, but for your specific product, they're not. And you devalue your own data. If you're doing things very specific to the way that Amazon does it, your data is not the same as Amazon. Amazon is going to have a review system that is very much based on products. And if you're doing a service, you probably don't want to have a review system that's exactly like theirs. It's not going to work for you. But this goes back to what I said in the last couple slides. Evolve it, make it into something better. Use it as a starting point, but don't copy it. So, obviously burning all the peasants works for Tridor, but you don't want to do that too. So this is the next misconception. I hear this one a lot. I actually got into a couple arguments with my marketing manager in my last company. Important content needs to be above the fold. So what is the fold? Back before the web, when people still read newspapers, anything above the fold was at the front of the paper when it sat on the rack, so that when you walked by, you can see it. It caught your eye as you walked by, you didn't even have to pick the newspaper up. Anything after that was deemed less important. So this translated over to the web, and rightly so. When the web first started, you had smaller resolutions. You wanted to try to get your important information, so when someone got to your website, after probably waiting 15 seconds on your 28K modem, you wanted them to have the most important information first. Today's day and age, this is not necessary at all and is practiced way too much in my opinion. So 75% of people begin scrolling before the web page finishes loading today. 90% of mobile users will start to scroll within the first 14 seconds of them being on your site. And the majority of a user's time is spent below the 700 pixel mark on the desktop. So those are some things to keep in mind. It's not always about what's above the fold. So important content doesn't need to be above the fold. It needs to be easy to find. So what that means is we know that scrolling is instinctual. Clicking is a decision. Yeah, do you have a question?
You said where the time is spent below 700 pixels.
Yep.
Does that mean below the resolution of 700 pixels on the device?
I'd have to go to the actual site. I have it sorted, sourced here.
It means that it's below that fold.
Again, I'd have to go to the link to find out the resolutions that they tested in, but a standard resolution that they've tested against, most of your time is if you took the top half and you measured 700 pixels down and scrolled up to that, most of the time was spent below that section of the page. So most people are scrolling down and staying in that section of the website and never going back up to the top.
So the section that's below 700?
Yes, below 700 pixels, correct. Yep. So because of that, we don't want to jam as much as we can above 700 pixels. A lot of people will try to jam ads up there, every navigation item they have on the site, the big announcement for their company. just if you put too much, it becomes information overload. It becomes hard for your eyes to discern all the different areas. It becomes much harder for people to process the data. So negative space is important, or white space. Just like sound is, the lack of sound is deafening, white space gives separation to content and allows your eyes to focus on certain things. So you want to use that to your advantage. You also want to keep your navigation simple and minimal, especially up in the header. So keep it to key points. A lot of people will go to like drop-down menus. Those are okay, as long as you don't overdo it and don't have like 15 trees. Just again, simple. You want people to find what they're looking for immediately. And then duplicate that navigation in your footer. People scroll, so people are going down. If they're going to go down your page and not find what they're looking for, they're probably not going to scroll back up to find what they're looking for. They're going to hit back, or they're going to leave your site if they came in over Google. Put your extended navigation in your footer. They have more of a chance of diving deeper into your site and staying there. A popular thing that's been showing up, oh, go ahead.
Talking about fixed headers and fixed footers.
Yeah, now that's one thing that people are doing more of too, is where they're keeping the header fixed, especially in mobile devices. So that is an option as well. I like to, a lot of times we'll still have, even if I do that, we'll have a very limited header with maybe 3 or 4 links, but then the footer nav will actually have those categories out and have sublinks underneath them. So like an extended, almost like mini sitemap, so that you don't have to go digging for something. At that point, they can see pretty much everything that your site has to offer. One of the things that people are doing a lot now are these hero headers, and there's actually been a little bit of controversy about them, but I seem to like them, and so does most of the internet from what I can see. So this is the Barcamp website. They're utilizing a hero header. Where that bar is at the bottom, that denotes the 700 pixel mark. So everything below that would be considered below the fold. So you can see, nice big picture. I'm curious now about this. I can see a lot of white space. I'm getting some information. I know when the event is. I can register for it. I know a little bit about it, but that's it. I'm being encouraged to scroll. It's sparking my interest. Things aren't jammed up there. Not every detail about Barcamp is above that scroll. So now I'm more likely to interact with the site. So it seems to be a common trend that's starting to pick up.
So what's the hero?
What's that?
What's the hero?
Oh, I'm sorry. The hero would be considered the big header, the oversized header. Yeah, so like that picture, to where that bottom of the picture is, would be considered the hero. Like Apple, if you go to Apple's website, their whole screen is like the iPod 7 right now. That's all it is. You have to scroll to get any more information. That's considered a hero banner. Sometimes it's a slideshow. Sometimes it's just static. Sometimes there's content over it. This is kind of hard to see, but there are 4 navigation links at the bottom of the picture. They're kind of weird there, but. So the next misconception I want to jump into, kind of shifting gears a little bit, and I actually got this one in my own office a couple weeks ago. Tables are evil. Anybody who's been developing for a while probably remembers the days of coding and creating websites using tables, like physical tables in HTML. By now we all know not to do that. So what are tables good for? Well, tables are good for statistic data. So this is a good use of a table, right? I'm comparing data. So what tables are actually for are tabular data, and you don't want to be afraid to use it. So let's just quickly go through why, and I'm probably beating a dead horse here, but we know we should never use tables for layouts. HTML is a semantic language. What you write actually does mean something. Screen readers use it. Search bots use it. There's plenty of things that can take this semantic code and do something with it. So it actually means something. Tables limit design responsiveness. So yeah, they have a little bit of flexibility when it comes to percentages, but you lack some of the abilities to reposition elements and change column sizes and stuff that is common in responsive design using divs, sections, etc. Tables limit design accessibility. Tables are always right, left to right, down, top to bottom. Always. There's no skipping around. Tab indexes don't do anything on table cells. So when you have a design that's made in tables, screen readers can't read it properly. Things may be out of order when when a search engine comes to look at it. And browsers must actually read tables twice to render them. They read the data first, and then they read the structure, and they have to basically go over them twice. So that, while nowadays is minimal, does add time. And then, of course, we know the exception is HTML emails. Anyone who's dealt with that knows you probably are going to use and abuse tables. But on the flip side now, you never want to use CSS display properties to show tabular data. And this kind of came up for me personally a few weeks ago. It was like, we need to display this tabular data. You know, we're going to have to show like names of things and the status that they're in, and this is a really good use for tables. But I can't use tables because I was told tables aren't usable for these kind of things. You want to stay away from tables. So that, again, tabular data, like I showed before, and if you need to compare things, you need to put things in a table for the reason of a table. You want to use table tag. HTML is semantic. Tables mean something. So putting things in a table tells the screen reader that this is a table worth of information. It tells the SEO or the search engine that's coming through and crawling your website that that's what it is, and it needs to process the data as such. Pseudo tables limit accessibility because you want tabular data to be read left to right and top to bottom. Depending on how you've structured your code, that may not be the case or when it comes through. So, I guess that was it for that one. So, move on to the next one. Oh, go ahead.
So when you're talking about using the display property, specifically you mean CSS display, table, row, table, stuff like that?
No,
Divs as table elements?
Yeah, you don't want to do that for tabular data.
Yeah.
Right. The CSS properties like display table row, those things were given as like we know people do tables so much, we need to give that same functionality, so that's what we're going to call them. When you use those, you can technically develop a table in all divs using just those and get a table to look the way you want, but it's not semantically a table. Those properties just mimic what a real table would do. So.
And according to semantic web, we should be using the proper elements for how we want to display.
Right, exactly. Just like there's an address tag for addresses and a tel tag for telephone numbers, you know, again, these tags mean something, so you want to use them for what they're meant for. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next one. Users make good choices. And we know that they make easy choices. They don't make bad choices, but they make easy choices. And that's because users are lazy and they're impatient. They will click on the very first thing they see that pertains to what they're trying to do. And it's actually kind of funny because users believe that clicking on something that resembles something that they might want to do and then clicking back when it doesn't is actually more efficient than actually reading the entire web page. So, based on a study with Netflix, users who don't find what they're looking for within the first minute to minute and a half will likely leave your website. So what should you do as a developer? Well, first thing, you should make sure your back button works. How many of you have dealt with a single page application and when you hit back it doesn't do anything? Yes. So make sure your back button works. Make sure you're using history states properly. Duplicate your you want to duplicate your important navigational links, and I kind of touched on this already. You know, you're going to have them in the header. You may have your header floating. Put them in the footer. You may have actual things that are really important that you won't need to put somewhere else actually in the flow of the document too. It's a use case thing. But make sure that your navigational links are easily accessible and all over the place. Make sure your key points point to hyperlinks. So if I went to Apple's homepage and their header is iPhone 7 and I can't click anywhere on that to get more information about the iPhone, that's a bad user experience. Make sure that there's some way for you to interact. If you have an element calling out something, you want to make sure that there's a way for the user to interact with that and get more information. And then keep your links distinct and concise. Keep them short. Make sure that it's as small as it can, but it relays the information that you're trying to get across. And then lastly, provide a search mechanism. Someone's not going to find what they're looking for, make sure that you have a way for them to find what they're looking for. Yeah?
Sorry, can you give me an example of distinct and concise?
We had, let's see, we just had something come up with this in our product. With our way that we were starting workflows, we had a button that said, like, start this workflow, instead of, it was this large button, that too many words. 3 words, you don't think that's too many words, especially when you're talking about responsive design. You want to be able to get that button down to 1 word when you go smaller so that it still conveys what it does without having to write a dictionary about what it's doing.
So start.
Exactly.
With a workflow title on the top.
Yeah, exactly. So there's ways
Start,
to...
edit, delete.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now the next one. Accessibility is not worth the time. So accessibility is absolutely worth the time. If you ever had someone say, it doesn't matter, we can do it later or whatever, no. You want to be focusing on accessibility. Especially if you're in a business, you're trying to get people to come to your site, interact with your product, trying to buy something, you're a bank, you want people on your site and you want to reach that bigger audience. So 285 million people cannot read all content on the screen. Even more so, 39 people can't read at all. They just have no vision. And then about 600 million people have some kind of hearing impairment. And that really is only going to affect you if you're doing some kind of video streaming and you don't have subtitles or something along those lines. But the ones we want to focus on here are vision. You want to be able to make sure that those people can interact with your site. So what you're going to do is you're going to make more semantically correct websites. And again, semantics, talking about the code, the coding structure. When a screen reader comes in, it doesn't look at how the screen looks to you. It actually goes through the code and pieces it together and reads that information, and it allows a user to use a keyboard or some other device to skip through navigation and headers to find what they're looking for on your site. That also is going to translate to better usability for typical users who do have decent vision. More semantically correct code is going to just provide a better interface in terms of organization. You're going to get better SEO out of it. Again, we're talking about the code. When Google's bot comes through, it's reading the code to determine whether or not it's going to index your content and what information to index so that it can be searched for. Yes?
Sorry, what is SEO again?
SEO, search engine, search engine optimization.
Thank you.
Yep. And then accessibility is required by law for government sites, highly recommended for private sites. And just because you're a private company, if one of your customer is a government customer, a county or state, you may be required to make sure that those sites are accessible. Yeah, I mean, the biggest example here is Target Corporation. They did not have an accessible site. They were sued. They were sued because the screen readers could not interact with their site, and they eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. So that's the end of my presentation. I have jammed through that thing.
You're going to make it longer than that thing.
Yeah, I thought I was going to as well. So I guess my last part is here, we're hiring at Accusoft. If you're interested in any of these topics or developing sales or marketing, feel free to go check out our careers page. We have a lot of cool things going on for the company. So that's it.